I want to start this morning by reading an excerpt from a book called Where Men Win Glory, The Odyssey of Pat Tillman. It's written by John Krakauer about the life of Patrick Tillman. Patrick Tillman, 27 years old, previously employed as a strong safety in the National Football League, was unquestionably the most famous enlisted man in Afghanistan. When the World Trade Center came crashing to earth on September 11, 2001, he had been a star player with the Arizona Cardinals, renowned for patrolling the defensive backfield with riveting intensity. But Tillman came from a family with a tradition of military service that went back several generations, and he believed that as an able-bodied American, he had a moral obligation to serve his country during a time of war. He didn't think he should be exempt from his duty as a citizen simply because he played professional football. So after the 2001 NFL season, he walked away from a $3.6 million contract and volunteered to spend the next 3 years of his life as an infantryman in the U.S. Army. Pat Tillman didn't think it was right that while his countrymen were at war, that he should be sitting home doing nothing. John Krakauer writes of Tillman, his belief that other things in life took priority over amassing wealth never faltered. But if Tillman was uncommonly resistant to the temptations of the baser human appetites, he found it nearly impossible to resist appeals to his sense of decency and justice. He wasn't necessarily a patriot in the traditional sense. He just had an overwhelming need to do what he believed was right. On April 22, 2004, not 2 years after enlisting in the U.S. Army Rangers, Pat Tillman was killed in a tragic friendly fire incident in Afghanistan. But before Pat gave his life for his friends, his platoon, and his country, he had already given his life in exchange for the opportunity to serve. In our first reading this morning, we heard Jesus describe himself as the Good Shepherd, and then go on to say that the Good Shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And then in our second reading from the Gospel of John, we hear Jesus say the words, "No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." But the question comes up, what does it mean to lay down your life for someone else? I think it's hard to read those words and not think of Jesus, whose own sacrifice for the sins of the world through the death on the cross seemed to be echoed in those words. And while they may not have understood it at the time, the disciples most certainly would have thought of Jesus' own death when reflecting on those words later. And when early Christians read the gospel according to John, not only would they have thought immediately of Jesus dying on the cross, but they probably would have heard it as encouragement to them to go out and risk their own lives sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. The church has a history of interpreting this line and others to mean that love equals totally committing ourselves, and that love of God means that we should be willing to literally die for our faith. Many parts of the church venerate and revere people who have died for what they believed. We call them martyrs. Stephen was the first. The Acts of the Apostles tell the story of Stephen, who, after accusing Jewish authorities of rejecting God by rejecting the gospel, was dragged out of town and stoned for blasphemy. More modern examples include Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a Lutheran pastor in Nazi Germany, who was executed for his public stand that the Nazi regime was counter to the gospel of Jesus Christ. And there was Oscar Romero, an El Salvadoran bishop in the Catholic Church, who was murdered in 1980, largely for his stand against the government's oppression of the poor in El Salvador. But for each of these examples, before there was a death for the sake of a cause, there was a life given over to God in pursuit of that cause. Now, Pat Tillman fascinates me because the life he gave up was the life that so many of us dream of. He played a kid's game for money, and he was good at it. He had everything you could ever ask for: happiness, stability, a wife and family who loved him, and the ability to do really whatever he wanted without any financial concerns at all. You see, what made Pat Tillman truly remarkable was not that he gave his life in battle, but that long before his tragic death, he had already given his life for what he believed. See, so often we say that someone gave the life. What we really mean to say is that person gave the rest of their life, the life that they would have lived had they not died. But giving your life also means your right now life. See, for all of its importance, life is just a series of days, which are themselves composed of hours, minutes, seconds, a lengthy series of moments, some of which are characterized by banality and routine, while others are punctuated with excitement and sometimes sheer terror. But each day is another chance to live, to learn and to grow, to love others and to be loved by others. When Jesus says that no one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends, I don't think he did so anticipating that we would all have to face life-threatening situations for the sake of our loved ones. I think he meant that some people might end up dying, but that all of us will have to give of our days richly for the glory of God and the advancement of God's kingdom. And I doubt many of us would object to giving our lives to Christ, at least not in principle. Were we put in a situation where bravery or courage were called upon, if we had to rush into a burning building to save our children for the sake of Jesus Christ, I think we'd do that. If we were called upon to throw ourselves into traffic to rescue someone we cared about, I think most of us wouldn't think twice about it. But most of us will never be put in a situation like that. Fred Craddock, who's also a Presbyterian minister, has written that when he gave his life to Christ, he was ready to do it all in one big lump sum all at once. It seemed to him, he said, like writing one big check to God for $1 million. Here's my life, God, take it all. But what he found out is that giving his life to Christ never required him to give it all in one big glorious gesture. To the contrary, he found that God sent him back to cash that check and break it up into quarters and dollar bills, and that giving his life to Christ meant doling that big check out in small increments of 50 cents here and $1 there every day for the rest of his life. You see, big gestures are easy. Giving your life is easy. Giving your days, that's a little bit harder. And that's what Jesus is asking for here, our days. You know, I imagine Christ's call in our lives, asking for our days, might go something like this. Hello? Jesus. Hey, yeah, no, we were just talking about you. Yeah, no, that's, you heard what? Yes, I did, all of it. Signed it over last week. That's right, my whole life, the whole thing. Tomorrow? No can do, big guy. Tomorrow's full. I got a lot of meetings and stuff tomorrow. Tuesday. You know, Tuesday's pretty booked too. Look, honestly, the calendar's pretty full for the next couple of weeks. Tell you what, let's do. Let's stick a pin in it. Let's take a rain check. And call me in a couple of weeks and see where I am, okay? Hey, actually, I'm kind of in the middle of a thing right now, so can I call you back? Bye. Bye. Love you, Jesus. So yes, we want to give our days to Jesus. Truth be told, actually, we probably would just side button that call. Oh, not that guy again. But if we claim we love Jesus, then our love should be lived out daily in lives that are lived loving and serving God by loving and serving God's people. Now, what that looks like might be different for every person, and it might be different from day to day. It doesn't necessarily mean quitting your job and uprooting your family to move them across the world, but it might. Michael and Rachel Ludwig did just that a little over a year ago. Now, some people might think Michael's a minister. They do crazy things like that all the time. But it would be a mistake to dismiss Rachel and Michael's level of commitment to God that resulted in that decision. And it would be wrong to assume that they've done so without physical and emotional hardship. They have moved to a new country literally on the other side of the planet and with 2 small children, no less. They have a security guard because they need one. They are learning a new non-European language. They are entering the hot months in a sub-Saharan country that's always hot. They are navigating a different culture in a different language. Michael wrote in his February update, some of you probably read it, says the hardest part is having the energy to stretch out and try to be part of another culture after you've done the work of just surviving. And maybe that's all giving your life to Christ is. Finding the energy to stretch out and be a part of the lives of our neighbors, even after doing the daily work of surviving. Reaching beyond ourselves, stretching out, as Michael says, to care about other people's lives, to spend time with them and listen to them, to be a supporting arm for them to lean on, to be a strong pair of shoulders to help them carry the burden. Maybe it means stretching out beyond what makes us comfortable, to do the hard things that need to be done. Giving our lives for Christ isn't just a grand gesture of self-sacrifice. It's a daily recommitment to loving and serving God by loving and serving God's people. Now, if a person were to live 100 years, to be 100 years old, that person would live 36,525 days. If you're doing the math, don't forget to count the leap years. That's a whole lot of days. There's some holidays in there. There's lots of weekend days, a fair number of Mondays, which my 10-year-old son describes as the armpit of the week. Days follow days until they can seem to blur into one another, but each one provides us with a new opportunity. Each day we make choices that govern how we're going to live, how we choose to use those days says a lot about us. Tell you one last story before we're done here. David Bailey. He was the son of Presbyterian missionaries. He grew up playing the guitar and he loved to sing and write songs. But upon his graduation from college, he left all that behind and accepted a job in a corporation. He was busy and he was important and he did a lot of good work, but he didn't see his family a whole lot and he was always running. There were lots of people that depended on him doing his job. But after about 10 years, he was diagnosed with a malignant brain tumor. His doctor told him at the time he had about 6 months to live. So he decided that rather than spending his days in a corporate job, he'd quit and return to his first love, songwriting and performing. He traveled around and played concerts, would talk to people, share his story. We had him come to Clemson once and sing and talk to our students. One of my favorite songs of his goes like this. He writes, "Don't let the grass grow beneath your busy feet. Don't let the grass grow above you when you rest. You've got one more day to get to where you're going. One more day to give your very best. Don't let the clouds forever block your sunshine. Don't let the sunshine blind you on your way. You might have years of tears put behind you, but right now, you've got one more day. One more day when you can hold your children. One more day when you can hold your wife. One more day when you can watch the grass grow. One more day when you can live your life." 14 years and 3 months after his diagnosis, cancer finally claimed the remainder of David's life. But in that time, David lived 5,205 more days in which he loved his wife and children, in which he shared the gospel, in which he traveled to churches and youth conferences, sharing his music and writing more music until he couldn't anymore, giving a message of hope and changing people's lives. David passed away in October 2010, but long before that, he had laid down his life for those he loved. One day we may be called on to die for what we believe, to give our lives for something that's important to us all at once. But right now, you and I, we are all being invited to give our lives to Jesus one day at a time. To God be all glory, honor, power, and dominion in this world and in the world that is to come.